Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, everybody. Before we get started, I do want to wish a meaningful Yom Kippur to the Jewish members of our audience here. For those of you who are not aware, Yom Kippur is a solemn holiday, so happy Yom Kippur is kind of a no-go. But didn't want to say that right off the bat. But today we're going to be talking about why blaming your employer or blaming your boss is the absolute worst thing you can do, and why it's going to stop you from actually getting to a place where you're happy. So a lot of people, they're in a position where like, oh yeah, my boss gives me too much work, or my boss is a total jerk, or management's horrible, management has us understaffed, and they do all these horrible things. And I'm not denying that may very well be true. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Normally it is, because people don't often make things up, but sometimes things get twisted. That said, your reaction to it is what's going to determine your future. So I just want to go over the 5 reasons, right? Or the 5 really thoughts that should go through your head, the 5 perspectives when you're faced with a situation where you don't agree with what your boss is doing, when you don't agree with what management is doing, where you don't feel like you're in a place that's, where you're respected and where things are being run properly. So the first thing is to acknowledge that bosses are doing the best that they can by the lights that they have. So those lights may be very dim, right? But these are human beings, right? And they are getting pressure from somebody else, who's getting pressure from somebody else, who's getting pressure from somebody else. And ultimately, even the guys at the very, very, very top are getting pressure from the shareholders, which, if you guys own stock, is actually you. And obviously you're not providing direct pressure, but at the end of the day, everybody reports to somebody, and it's this giant complex system. And human beings are trying to meet these conflicting goals, and they screw up, right? I mean, that's just the fact. Is like, I know that in running a business, if you don't treat employees with respect, you're not going to have good employees for very long, right? That I understand that, and I understand the concept of creating culture. And some people don't understand that, and some people understand it, but they can't bring themselves to do it in the moment because there's this immediate thing that's causing them stress. But sitting there and having a little bit of empathy, right, and kind of stepping out of your shoes is really the first step. Because if you're just locked into your own contracted perspective, then you're not going to get the breadth of understanding that's necessary to deal with a very complex and very difficult situation. And that brings us to the second point: is when you do step out of your shoes, you're going to see that employers have other options, right? And ultimately, a lot of their actions are guided by the fact that, they can replace employees. So, when I was at BCG, I was a big consulting firm a long time ago, and they knew that there were people jumping, begging to join that company, right? They paid well, they had good benefits, and they just had a bunch of talent. Now, the result was that some people in the company, said, hey, listen, we're going to try to, get the best, culture them, create people who are going to be the future leaders. And there are some people who said, hey, listen, let's just churn and burn it. We'll work them in 100 hours a week, whatever. We can just replace them. Now, that creates a leadership pipeline problem. But if we didn't understand that, right, then, we wouldn't understand how much give and take there was, right? So it's important for you to step outside and realize that employers do have other options. And a lot of times, if you feel like they're not being fair to you, the real question is, hey, listen, what's the next guy going to do, and can he deliver as well? And that's really hard for a lot of people to realize, is that in most jobs, you're replaceable, right? In most jobs, you can be, somebody else can come in, another cog in the machine, and that's the unfortunate reality. And a lot of people don't want to acknowledge that, and when they do, it actually makes them more angry, because then what happens is then there's fear involved, because they say, hey, listen, I'm afraid that I'm going to get replaced. And then this leads to this anger, like, how dare they? And oh my God, I should not be in this position. I should have a permanent job, all this kind of stuff. The problem with that, though, is that it doesn't get you anywhere. If you deny it, if you struggle against it, if you fight it, then it doesn't change the outcome, right? This is reality. But there's a flip side to this coin, and that is, employers have other options, but you should have options too. So every employer is also replaceable. Every employer has competition that you could go to, and you can even change your field entirely, right? So when you realize that you actually have options too, just like they do, suddenly it's not so unbalanced, right? So with a bit of effort, you can even that playing field, right? And there's nothing wrong with doing that. There's no reason to feel guilty about that. That is perfectly natural. That's the nature of capitalism. Put in the initiative, put in the effort, and then you have options too. And then what happens is you're really a meeting of equals, right? Dealing with, hey, listen, is this something that's a good fit or not a good fit, rather than you being in a state of desperation, because that doesn't serve you at all, right? And ultimately, this is a big one, guys. When you blame your employer, when you blame your boss, when you say, hey, listen, they're treating me so poorly and all this kind of stuff, that may all be true. But when you focus on the blame, you give up your power, right? So you have the choice to live as cause, right? To do something, to change the situation, to go and look at other options, to go and look at other career fields, to go and start a new career entirely. Or you have the option to say, oh, well, I'm the effect. This happens and I just have to take it, right? Cause and effect. Which one do you want to be, right? So when you take responsibility for your life and your career, it's actually really empowering, because you drop the blame. You say, hey, listen, it is what it is. I accept it. I'm going to work around it. It's my responsibility to do what I need to do to make the career that's best for me. And that may involve being here. It may not, right? But when you drop that and you start to take control, it's actually really empowering, because now it's not somebody else's fault anymore. It's not, out of your control. It's something where you have action you can take to change it. And that's really uplifting, because suddenly it's not just something happening to you anymore, right? The alternative is to go into the victim mentality. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, the victim mentality is absolutely toxic. So, if you don't go down the path of taking control, if you don't go down the path of standing up and saying, hey, listen, it's my responsibility to either fix a bad situation or get out of it, right? Then the next thing that happens is prolonged blame becomes this story, right? This kind of, oh, the world is against me. And, like I had a discussion the other day with somebody on one of my Facebook ads who basically, was like, oh, well, this sucks and there's nothing I can do and it's so competitive and blah, 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 blah. And they ignored all the advice, like, hey, listen, have you looked at this other thing? Have you looked at podcasting? Have you looked at, this? Have you looked at that? And so instead of saying, hey, I'm going to look at other opportunities, they were living in this victim story. And so then when you're in that victim story, you don't see the other opportunities. You don't actually get the ability to go start something new, right? And the other thing is you don't see where you need to upgrade yourself, where you need to take to grow in order to get what you want, right? So if you're sitting there saying, oh, well, it's so competitive, it's so competitive, it's so competitive. Okay, well, have you really worked on your resumes and cover letters? Because the thing is, it may not be as competitive as you think. It may just be that you're not doing things the right way, right? And so if you sit in a story of blame, then you close off that opportunity for growth. You close off that ability to see, hey, listen, where do I need to step up? Where do I need to improve my game? Where do I need to become more convincing, right? So that I can get what I really want, right? Focus on what you want and what you need to do to get there, instead of focusing on the obstacles that are in your way, right? So guys, if that's where you are, right? If you're like, hey, listen, this makes sense. I've been blaming, I've been doing this. It's time for me to step up, take control. It's time for me to have my career in my hands and not give up that power to anybody else. Well, if that's where you are, then what I would recommend is that you go to www.oculusinstitute.com/scheduling. If you want to take control of your career, then I'm here to help. Book a call, and I will speak to you guys soon. But remember, guys, that at the end of the day, your career is your responsibility. If something's not working, then either change it, negotiate it, or get out, because that's ultimately, you're the one who has to choose whether or not you're going to live in the victim mentality or whether you're going to live as cause and make the changes that you need to make. Okay, guys, have a good one, and I will talk to you guys this weekend.